Abney was born in Chicago in 1982, yes, 1982, and now lives and works in New York. She is known for fusing the seriousness of portraiture with the complexities of narrative painting, and for placing figures based on real people into imaginative worlds to create works that address controversial issues regarding cultural signals as well as race and gender. Abney received her BFA in 2004 from Augustana College in Rock Island, Illinois, and her MFA in 2007 from Parsons School of Design in New York. Her paintings have been shown in the United States and abroad, in such places as Kravitz Webby Gallery in New York, Fred Gallery in London, Art Basel, Switzerland, and the Studio Museum in Harlem. She currently has work on view at the Nassau County Museum of Art in Rosslyn, New York, and in the fall of 2014 will have a solo exhibition at the National Academy Museum in New York. Abney's work, New York City that is. Abney's work is in the collections of the Brooklyn Museum, the Corcoran Gallery of Art, and of course, the Rubel Family Collection in Miami. Please join me in welcoming to the stage this very talented artist, Nina Chanel Abney.
Thanks, Katie, for the great introduction. It's been over 6 years since I created the work that's in the 30 Americans exhibition. And needless to say, a lot has happened since 2007, and my work has changed quite a bit. I tend to work very intuitively, so my paintings are reflective of the surroundings of the time in which they are created. And they become recordings of my current interests, personal experiences, in the news headlines of the moment. So I'm going to actually walk you through the evolution of my work and tell you a bit about my thought process, briefly about the physical process of actually creating the work, and give you an explanation of the elements that are working within my paintings. So in 2006, I was in the last year of my MFA program at Parsons School of Design. And at the time, I was very interested in painting from life. So during my Christmas break, I went home and I asked my friends and family if I could do their portraits. So this one actually is a picture of my Aunt Regina, my Aunt Jackie. One of my cousins is in the audience, so she's probably laughing. My younger sister. Also at this time, I was experimenting with layering gesso on the canvas to create some kind of texture, as you can see on the top. After Christmas break, I had brought these portraits back to school, and I showed them to my advisor at the time. And she actually thought the work would have been more compelling if it was painted larger than life. So she actually suggested that I paint on a much larger scale. So after these portraits, I took her advice to the extreme, and I created this painting titled 4 Stops, which is about 10 by 11 feet long. So looking back, I think my advisor, Mira Shore, definitely was the reason that I started working on a large scale. Had it not been for her suggestion, I don't know, I probably would have been working much differently. And in working on this painting, I really enjoyed how I had more room to experiment and have my figures interact with each other. So after this, I wouldn't really work much smaller after that. So after this painting, I had to create something for my MFA thesis show. And for most MFA students, the thesis show is like your last-ditch effort to get a gallery before you have to start applying for real jobs. So I sought out to make the biggest painting I could fit in my studio to snag the attention of a gallery. And so I was trying to come up with ideas of what I would do for this painting. And around that time, I was introduced to Adrienne Piper's work. And in particular, I was introduced to her calling cards For those who aren't familiar with this piece, Adrian Piper essentially handed out these cards during dinner parties to individuals who made a racist remark, and they were completely unaware that she is African American. So seeing this piece, I kept thinking about the reaction of the individual and the thoughts that were running through their head and the uneasiness they probably have felt. So I immediately became interested in applying this passive-aggressive approach to my thesis show painting, and I would use the painting to create something that would push the viewer, or in the case of my thesis show painting, the sitter, to confront their own prejudices and preconceptions. And I was the only African American student in my MFA class, and I also worked in the admissions office, so not only did I experience what it was like to be the only African American student, I also witnessed the lack of African American applicants to Parsons as well. And also around this time, I was having a conversation with a friend about the disproportionate numbers of African American males incarcerated at that time. So I then realized I had all the components for my thesis show painting. So I would somehow combine my recent interest in portraits, Adrian Piper's passive-aggressive approach, and the lack of African American applicants to MFA programs, as well as the amount of Black men incarcerated in prison. So I sought out to do a class portrait. And what I did, I told all of my classmates that I would paint them, but they could not see the portrait until the thesis show. So when it came time for the thesis show, and I flipped this over, so the reactions were pretty mixed. Some laughed, and some were quiet. A lot appeared visibly uncomfortable, and others actually thought I was angry at them. And these are some of the side-by-sides. I ended up titling this painting Class of 2007. So at this point, I was still working in a washy watercolor kind of way. So this painting actually ended up getting me a gallery, which I was happy about. And after graduation, I continued to do, let me go back. Also, this painting is the first point where I started using the rubber gloves that would make numerous appearances in my work that would come after. And in this painting, I use them in a more literal sense because I depicted Dan and Dave as the dishwashers, but I later would use them for other reasons, which I'll talk about later. So this is another portrait I did titled Veronica after I graduated. And I usually, when I paint my friends, I just titled the paintings by their name. And this one that's actually in the exhibition, titled Kalika and Jeff. Here again, I use the rubber gloves. Again, I use them in a more literal sense here as they're depicted in a bathroom. I guess she's kind of scolding him because he didn't do any work. And I eventually used the rubber gloves, though, as a way to identify certain figures in my larger works that had multiple figures in them, to identify certain figures as villains or figures who have done some kind of dirty work but not wanting to take responsibility for it, or figures that were protecting themselves from some kind of harm. So the gloves actually were the beginning of what would evolve into a major interest in symbolism and an interest for me to create new meanings for familiar objects and creating new symbols. And in addition to doing my acrylic paintings, I simultaneously work on watercolors. And the watercolors, they're just definitely, the first thing that comes to mind is more of a form of relaxation from my acrylic paintings that usually, I guess, have deadlines attached to them. So I can just sit and work on the watercolors in front of the TV and not think about it too much. And these are all fairly small, maybe about 11 by 8.
How big was the really big one that got to the gallery?
That was 10 by 18 feet. And that actually also was a part of the 30 Americans exhibition, but it's too hard to travel with, so it only showed in Miami. So these are just more watercolors. In these, the set of 25 watercolors that are also part of the exhibition, I originally created these for an organization actually named ACREA that was hosting an auction that would benefit HIV research. So prior to making the work, I thought about an exaggerated personification of HIV being a monster. So that's where these images came from. So I decided to kind of depict a monster in different scenarios. So I initially created them for something else, and the Rubels happened to come into the gallery when I dropped them off and insisted that they be kept together as a set, and they actually bought all of them. And so I had to go back and create 25 more that night for the benefit. And also within these paintings, I start to take an interest in depicting some of the figures with masks or mask-like faces. And my fascination with masks came out of my childhood experience with the face of Emmett Till. And to this day, I refuse to look at an image of Emmett Till. I remember as a child seeing his face on an episode of Eyes on the Prize, and later hiding a Jet magazine that had his face on the cover. And I was horrified that this image of what appeared to be a shell of a person once resembled a young man, and I thought his face looked like a mask. So since then, I've been repelled and drawn to masks simultaneously, and I have come to use them in my work. And they have many uses, so I like their versatility. So also like the rubber gloves that I guess in a way are also a form of a mask, I will put mask on some of the figures. And I have different ways of doing it. So I also might depict the figures with clown faces, and I find clowns to be pretty disturbing, but also interesting because clowns laugh at themselves, but they typically are the joke. So I usually put clown faces on figures to show a broader idea that nothing is as it appears. And a lot of the figures in my larger paintings have a face painted under the mask that I put on top of them. So in 2008, I had my first solo show that I titled Dirty Wash, which is a synonym for gossip. And the show's inspiration was an intersection between politics and celebrity culture. And at the time, I thought, what if politicians were victims of the paparazzi like celebrities? So starting in about 2002, I started to see a shift in the news, and I began seeing more of news headlines include celebrities, and even notice how the actual news has been dramatized to compete with celebrity gossip. In 2007, when I began working on the show, there were quite a few interesting news headlines. I remember Britney Spears was going crazy at that time, and Anna Nicole Smith died. There were scandals with John Edwards and I think Larry Craig. So this piece, titled Randalisa, was inspired by the super couple like Tomcat or Bennifer or Brangelina. So this is a depiction of Condoleezza Rice with my friend Randall. And the work from this show is also the beginning of me using each painting as journal entries or snapshots of what was going on around me at that time. And I also became interested in kind of melding together different just ideas to make what would seem like one cohesive body of work or one cohesive painting.
About how long does this take?
It depends. Because I work very intuitively, it could take me a month, it could take me 3 months. Sometimes I'll spend a day in the studio just staring and decide, okay, I'll paint one eye, because I don't usually have a plan of how the paintings will start. So I don't quite remember how long this took me, but it probably took me about a month. And this painting was still pretty big, maybe 8 by 8 or 7 by 7. So another example, I guess, of me taking things from other places, Condoleezza Rice is depicted with Lil Wayne's star tattoos, because at the time when I was creating the painting, I saw an award show in which Lil Wayne performed a song titled Gossip. So that's just an example how I might watch TV and happen to find something that's, I guess, related to what I'm working on, and I'll just kind of throw that in the painting. And then the dogs were inspired by Michael Vick getting arrested at that time. And this is one of 2 paintings depicting Al Sharpton. This painting is it's called The Takeover, and it was inspired by Robert Colescott's George Washington Carver crossing the Delaware. And in this piece, I actually painted Obama prior to him winning the presidential nomination. I depicted him as the anchor of the boat. And this was the first painting out of that body of work for the Dirty Wash show. So looking back at it, I don't see it as so much of a scandal, but I was more interested in voyeurism and tried to paint the painting as if someone was catching a glimpse of something. And I grew up in the south suburbs of Chicago, which is definitely much different from New York. And when I moved to New York, I was pretty amazed at how unfazed most people were. And I think eventually I became just as numb to all of the madness, but I started to feel a clear distinction between my life in Illinois and my life in New York, and my inability to kind of meld them together at the time. And back home, I encountered people who were a lot more conservative, and when I got to New York, I was encountering people who would be deemed, I guess, as free spirits. So this glaring contradiction led me to explore ideas around sex and religion. And in 2009, I had my second solo show that I titled Emma's Basement. And with this show, I thought of a possibility of a space where people would partake in things considered taboo, or the people who would frequent this space would be publicly unaccepted by society because they act upon or say things that most people would be conditioned to be fearful of or ashamed of. And actually, prior to creating this work, I was already starting to be known as a narrative painter or a storyteller. And I try to remain in a space that can't be categorized. I think it allows me the freedom to experiment with every body of work I start to work on. So in 2009, especially with Emma's Basement, I purposely began to push the ambiguity of my work, and I started to place the figures in scenes in ambiguous spaces. I think in previous work, I would just give enough background information so the viewers would have a slight idea where the scenes were taking place. But I started to realize how people automatically assume a narrative when you paint figures. So I have been more interested in trying to obscure any narrative and more interested in abstracting narrative. So I think the mysterious quality of my work is definitely intentional. And the first thing people usually ask about my work is, what do the numbers mean, or every single symbol or word or letter. But I really try to challenge the individual's desire for a definition. So I try to purposely do things in my work that would leave it open to multiple interpretations. And in 2010, I still continued to abstract the backgrounds of my paintings. And I also wanted to emphasize the color and the humor. And because I paint fairly large and in usually confronting many loaded topics, my work can feel confrontational. So I like to use color to obtain a level of playfulness in the work. And I also try to do this with, humor. And I grew up watching a lot of cartoons. I used to like Droopy or Huckleberry Hound, and a lot of the cartoons that I liked were loaded with sarcasm and hidden innuendos. And I like how anything considered taboo can suddenly become tolerable as long as it's not real. So I also enjoy watching Family Guy or South Park. And I think those cartoons in particular are able to kind of spoon feed their audience these really loaded topics. So with that, I'm going to show you a short clip from one of my favorite episodes of South Park.
I'm going down south, I'm gonna have myself time.
Friendly faces everywhere, humble folks without temptation.
Going down south, I'm gonna leave my woe behind.
And we're parking day or night, people starting howdy neighbor.
And on up south, I'm gonna see if I can't unwind. Come on down south, I'm gonna meet some friends of mine.
And now back to Wheel of Fortune.
All right, Randy, congratulations on making it all the way to the bonus round.
Thanks, Pat.
You've got some family here watching tonight,
Yeah, they're all rooting for me.
and I'm sure you have lots of friends watching back home.
Yeah. Hi, everybody watching in South Park.
That's us!
Hey, Randy.
Hey, Randy! Hey, good luck! Well, let's see if you can't make everyone proud. The category is people who annoy you.
Okay.
As always, we give you the letters R, T, S, L, and E. We just need 3 more consonants and a vowel.
Okay, I'd like a B, an N, and a G.
And the vowel?
An O, please.
Okay, well, looks like you're gonna get a lot of help here. Category is people who annoy you. Audience, keep quiet, please. 10 seconds, Mr. Marsh.
I know it, but I don't think I should say it.
5 seconds, Mr. Marsh.
All right, I'd like to solve the puzzle. Niggers! Huh? Oh. Ooh. Oh, naggers, of course. Naggers. Right.
can we cut to a...
So I think that clip is a great example of how to talk about race in an unordinary way. And I think it talks about race in a way where all perspectives are kind of represented. When commenting on racism, sexism, and homophobia, not only do I try to remain neutral, but I think it's important to challenge overused symbols from such content that I think is unconsciously accepted into the art world. I think these symbols, when inserted into a contemporary context, lose their meaning, like a burning cross or a Klan hood. They obviously still have a slight sting, but I think after the initial reaction, the imagery is quickly reduced to being just another painting about race, and the viewer quickly moves on to the next painting. So I'm interested in things that create new ways of talking about loaded subjects, especially to a younger generation who have never or may not ever experienced overt acts of hate and discrimination. So in 2011, I was asked by the Studio Museum in Harlem to create a collage for their 3-part exhibition titled The Bearden Project. And I had never created a collage before, but in creating one, I realized how similar the process was to how I create my paintings. And I, in a way, collage different imagery to create one piece. So the piece I created for the Bearden Project, which is this collage right here, influenced the work that came after and inspired me to explore abstraction much further. And also in thinking about collage, I started to think about how my everyday started to become this attempt to meld together disparate occurrences and information. In one day, I might read the paper and get on the internet and check my email and get on Instagram and do this while I'm talking on the phone and watching TV and texting. So it's impossible for me not to cover a multitude of topics. And I started to feel like we are living in the age of information overload. And with that in mind, I began working on my most recent solo show, which exhibited in the fall of 2012, which I titled I Dread to Think. And I Dread to Think was a double solo show with smaller works showing in one space, and what I would consider the main attraction, a 9-panel, 60-foot-long triptych of triptychs in an additional space across the street. And at the time I was working on this show, my studio was in Times Square. So in addition to feeling like I was living in this age of information overload, I was literally located in one of the most chaotic spots in the city. And also feeling this overwhelming need for immediacy, this constant need for stimulation. Eventually I felt that there would have to be a boiling point, a breakdown. And coincidentally around this time, there was talk about the Mayans' prediction that the world would end. So with that in mind, I want to take on an ambitious painting loosely based on the idea of the unthinkable catastrophe taking place. And that's what inspired the triptychs of triptychs. So here are some of the smaller paintings from that show. And then I'll actually show you my studio and walk you through the whole process of me creating the triptych of triptychs. So this is my studio at the time. And this is how a painting starts. I don't sketch anything prior to creating a piece because I think the definitive nature of the act itself would have me lose interest in the painting before I started. So I usually just go straight to the canvas with a general inspiration, but no visual plan. So I really don't have any idea how the painting is going to start or how it's going to end. So here I actually staple my canvas to the wall because I work large, so I would have to roll it on a tube and have it stretched in the gallery. And I usually start with one solid background. So this is the first set of 3. And then I start to lay out a background. And the process it goes back and forth because sometimes I'll take stuff out. And this is another set of 3. I tried to take a different approach with every triptych. And so sometimes I'll use pictures off the internet, or I'll have people sit for me. And so when people sit for me, I'll paint their face, and then I'll take photographs of their face, and then have them leave, and then warn them ahead of time that they're gonna be whoever I choose to make them. Because I just use their head, and then I'll put them on whatever body that I want. And then as you can see, the pictures, as I want stuff in a painting, I'll find a picture like of a horse. So I find a picture of a horse I want and tack it up there to use as a reference. And that's the same set starting to get filled. This is the last triptych. So this is an example of how I will use photographs. So with this picture, I was looking up depictions of hell, and I found this picture, so I kind of liked how the figures were placed. So I kind of mimicked that in the middle panel, as you can see. And then I just started to add different things. Now you can get an idea of the scale. And then these are the finished pictures of each triptych. Ideally, I would want them to all show in one row, but it kind of showed in a square because we didn't have enough space. So that's them all together. So after this show, I wanted to challenge myself to do something I hadn't, so I wanted to make some black and white paintings. And I wanted to make sure I wasn't using, I guess, color as a crutch, because I'm known for using very vibrant colors. So I wanted to see if I could get some of the same effect without color. So then I started to create a few black and whites over the spring. And this is actually another collage I did. It's 75 inches long. And it's actually part of a show that I recently had with another artist, a painter named Charlie Roberts. And this show just came down last week. And for this show, we decided to have fun, and we dedicated the show to our shared interest in rap and hip hop. And with me recently focusing on painting all these different objects, I wanted to focus on the materialism that I feel rap music promotes. I think in the beginning, when I first started painting, I was painting in a watercolor, washy, I guess a drippy way. And I think my life had become so regimented at that time that I needed to be more loose in the studio. And I think as time has gone on and life has become a little more chaotic, I've felt the need to be more precise in how I create the work. Even though it is visibly more chaotic, but when I'm in the studio, it's very, I guess, precise in the process of me painting all of the lines. So I think my work has definitely transformed and will continue to change because I try to try something new in every body of work. I don't ever want to get to a point where I'm making, I guess, the same painting over and over again. But I'm having a show in the fall, and I think ideally I would want to work myself back to a place where I can combine everything I was doing in the beginning with what I'm currently doing. So when I first started, my artist statement was something along the lines of me being interested in fusing the seriousness of portraiture with the playfulness of cartooning and wanting to reveal a racism that is hidden in the everyday. Well, I want to actually end with what will currently act as my artist statement, and it's an explanation of my work by one of my supporters. And it goes as follows. Fields of disruption, her work is an amazing balance between figuration and abstraction, battling in the same. The intense, contrasting, unpredictable colors and rhythms are very American. Clanging away, the complex iconography is infused with social comment, mortality, and irony. The negative spaces, unresolved abstractions, creating aggressive schisms and deep punctures which rupture any possible harmonious visual resolutions. Borders are under continuous attack, resulting in energies spilling out of a fragile picture plane. Figurative elements are riddles with disruptive geometries. Letters and words add their song and build on the dance using the ambiguity of language. The constant presence of the number reads as a multi-layered, simultaneous present of count, abstraction, and the word. A bitter joy, our condition. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful talk. It was really great. I appreciate it. You mentioned two of your mentors or teachers, and when you look at Shore and Adrian Piper, his work is so completely different, and yet obviously they've been extremely supportive of your work. As I look at it, I see potentially some influence from someone like Stuart Davis or Ben Shahn or something, and I kind of wondered about how much you had looked at art history of generations that preceded Adrian Piper and Shore, and had that been an influence, or was this?
Well, actually, when I was working on the last show, the I Dread to Think show, I hadn't heard of Stuart Davis, I'm going to be perfectly honest. And Laurie Sims, who I don't know if you know her, she actually wrote a book on Stuart Davis, and she happened to do a studio visit with me, and she brought him up. And when I looked at his work, I was blown away by the similarities. Yeah. So since then, definitely Stuart Davis is an influence, but in the beginning, I wasn't actually aware of his work. And then also I'm inspired by Robert Colescott, and I find inspiration in a lot of the different artists. But I try to look at the work and then forget it, so I can kind of not have it affect my work too much.
But speaking of Lowry, also wrote Fredo Lam, and other things she's written about that cartoons that, not that Lam is a cartoon, but surrealist too, which Stuart Davis was kind of a combination. You're completely original, and that makes me so much play. It's really wonderful.
Thanks.
You started your talk really once you were in graduate school, but I'd love to know a little bit more about, when you were a kid, were you one of those kids that was always drawing? Did you come to art when you were an undergrad? You obviously are very skilled, and I'm just wondering how you decided that you were going to actually pursue this professionally.
Well, when I was a kid, I definitely drew all of the time, but I would mostly copy like Mickey Mouse and do stuff like that. And I don't think I didn't start painting until I was in high school. And even then, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then when I got into college, I double majored actually in studio art and computer science, and I thought I was going to be a computer programmer or eventually be a graphic designer. And so after that, I took a year off and I worked at Ford Motor Company, and I didn't like that job, so it pushed me to create a portfolio to get into grad school. But even then, I didn't know how artists made money. I hadn't even really been in a commercial gallery prior to coming to New York. So, and I definitely wasn't aware of many contemporary artists. Like I didn't know about any of the artists in 30 Americans prior to coming to New York. Or I didn't know what performance art was or installation. These things were foreign to me until I got to Parsons.
You talk about abstracting the narrative. Do you usually have something in mind, or are you just piecing things together, sort of going from a general theme?
Depends. Sometimes I'll have something in mind and I'll try to break it down where the story's not there anymore, or add other elements that take away from what I initially was thinking of. Or, like I said, because I work intuitively, I might have one thing in mind and then see something on the news and decide I'm going to use that in the painting also. So any more questions?
How do you think it rebels?
I met them as soon as I graduated, because they also have the class of 2007 painting. So that's how I met them. They had come to my gallery when I first got represented with them.
For your triptychs, I didn't personally notice any difference between the left and lower right. Was there anything conscious that you were distributing there?
No, not really. Well, the order I wanted to originally have them in, it would be like small to larger size, but I couldn't hang them in one line, so it didn't matter at that point.
You talked about icons and creating a system of symbols that kind of defamiliarize the familiar. What do you, I don't know, what's your ideal view, or what do you expect, or what feels fulfilling in terms of the way people engage with your work and the your symbols? What do you kind of expect of your audience or
I don't know if I have any expectations. I get people all the time give me all types of different meanings for what they think the work is, and that's fine with me. You know, I kind of want, as a viewer, for you to take whatever you can out of it, even if you don't like it or it makes you angry. I remember at one of my first shows, I saw a woman walk into the gallery and she looked disgusted, and she walked out, and then she came back and looked again. And I mean, I'm happy with any of that. But just to give you a way of how I might think about numbers generally, like for this painting, for instance, I envisioned a strip club, which is in a lot of rap songs. So all the number ones are like the dollar bills. So that's just a way of how I'll take something more that's literal and then change it into just like a repetition of a number instead of painting a dollar.
What is the title of this work? Do you give any clues to that?
The title of this painting is called Woody, And it's kind of inspired at the time Miley Cyrus, because it's like very recent painting. So. So, oh.
You mentioned before you went to New York, you hadn't had much exposure and you were not aware of how artists made money and things of that nature. What about the New York experience made those things become real to you, and what advice would you give to people who are desirous of becoming artists?
Well, when I came to New York, I definitely realized that artists can make money, and it's a huge business. So I would encourage a lot of artists, you know, to pursue art and not think of it as something they have to do in their free time or do with another job. But I think I compare it to the music business in a sense where you might not make it. But I don't know, there are musicians who aren't famous who have a full-time career doing it. So I think there are different, I think, I wouldn't say levels, but it's artists who don't have a gallery who are making a lot of money. There are artists with galleries who make money or don't. It's artists who sell their work on the street who are doing that full time and make a lot of money. But I definitely think it could be a full-time career.
As an artist, will you one day hope to be just like more a black artist? Would you one day hope to be labeled as an artist? Or is it important for you to be a black artist to be able to contribute to our culture?
I know, it's a hard question. I think I'm definitely proud to be a black artist and a female artist, but I think to make major changes overall, I want to be known as an artist. Because I think about what African American artists are really inserted into history and go through all the books. I just want anybody of any race to go through the books and say, oh, this is a cool artist, not because she's a black artist to feel any obligation to even look at my work, but just look at it visually because you like it.
First, I want to say you have some of the greatest pieces I've seen in quite some time.
Oh, thank you.
Two-part question. I appreciate the idea you mentioned your process and your expression. You mentioned that, of course, there's some current events, some ideas, what you might see in social, et cetera. Are any of them built upon your personal beliefs, be it religion, be it maybe a personal upbringing that tends to pull overboard in some of your expression?
Oh, definitely, but I hide those deep in the seam. No, of course. But like I do try to, like I said, remain neutral. So whether I have one opinion, because I don't want the work to be only for one kind of viewer, I try to, even if something I disagree with, I'll paint the other side of that also. I would definitely teach. I mean, I started doing lectures so I could not be so nervous talking about my work, but eventually maybe if I got a little bit better, I would be open to teaching. I do like to talk to students though, in high school and younger, because I don't know how many artists, they're able to see and talk to and ask them questions about applying to art school and all those kinds of questions.
Thank you.
Okay.